when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. I'm reading the English Standard Version, and I'm finding some of the words a bit unique. Verse 8, therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Verse 22. Because the king's order was urgent, and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Amen. Amen. Thank you. We can get back to our slides, media team. Want you to take an opportunity. There is an image there which we would want to see. A craftsman imagination of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. That is a semblance of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, which the Bible says was 27 meters high and almost 3 meters wide. That seems to be like the three Jewish young men, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and you can see the rest of the people, their heads are bowed down, and one of the people next to them is trying to encourage them to follow suit. But these guys are defiant. So that brings me to the first point. Number one, royal defiance. Verse 1 to 18, which we have already read. The name Nebuchadnezzar means, may Nebo protect the crown. That is from the Bible Thayer's Greek lexicon. And King Nebuchadnezzar is known to modern historians as Nebuchadnezzar II. And he ruled Babylonia from 605 to 562 BC. He was a king for about 43 years. That is just helping us to appreciate the kind of person we are dealing with, because he seems to be one of the main characters in this chapter. And as the most influential and longest reigning kings of the Neo-Babylonian period, Nebuchadnezzar conducted the city of Babylon to its height of power and prosperity. And historical and biblical records reveal that Nebuchadnezzar was an able but ruthless ruler who let nothing get in the way of subduing peoples and conquering their lands. So that is the king we are looking at this morning. And his ruthlessness is confirmed by Ashpenaz's fear in Daniel chapter 1 verse 10. You remember when Daniel made the request that they be just given vegetables and water. Ashpenaz said, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Nebuchadnezzar was not a joker. He meant business. And the astrologers also, the warning that he gave the astrologers in chapter 2 and verse 5. He told them that if you do not tell me my dream and interpret it, I will cut you into pieces. In other words, you will experience what sukuma wiki and cabbage goes through in the hands of Mama Mboga in the kibanda. And your houses will be turned into piles of rubble. And that was not an empty threat. And so, this is the character who now has summoned all his royal officials And just to remind you that Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego had just been appointed to these royal positions. So they were among the people, the dignitaries who are expected to come to this auspicious occasion of the dedication of this image of gold. Now, somehow curiously, the Bible is silent about Daniel in chapter 3. And so we choose not to speculate about where he was and what he was doing. When there's a rule in biblical interpretation that where the Bible is silent, also do not be loud. Just remain silent. And so we choose to go that route. Now, a summon by the king is a weighty matter which cannot be ignored. Because even when you are summoned by the Nyumba Kumi leader around where you stay, or your village elder, or the sub-chief, or the chief, you become worried and you run in haste. Now the king, how much more when summoned by a ruthless commander-in-chief of the armed forces at a time when democracy, the rule of law, and human rights were yet to see the light of day. I hear that in the disciplined forces, a command is greater than the one who has given it. And when you are told to jump, you jump fast and ask later why I was jumping, if you will have that opportunity to ask. But you obey the command first. And so this image was clearly an idol which was to be worshipped, considering the words of the herald in verse 5. Because he said, as soon as you hear the sound of all these musical instruments, what were the people expected to do? You must fall down and worship this image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So this was an idol, clearly. And we have read that proclamation there. Take note that this was a command from the king. It was not a polite and humble request. It was not, would you kindly consider bowing down? No, it was not a polite request. It was a command which was not open to discussion. And a clear punishment for any person who, for one reason or another, would choose or decide to obey it had been stipulated. And it is important to note that the prescribed punishment was not an empty threat, because Nebuchadnezzar made no such jokes. His word was law. Now verse 7 indicates that as soon as they heard the sound of the musical instruments, all the peoples, now there's the word all there, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image. That means, but verse 8 to 12 tells us that there was an exception. Some 3 Jewish young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, defied the royal command. That means that the word all in verse 7 is not overarching. It is not all encompassing. It means all the rest except these 3. And so Nebuchadnezzar was furious with rage. In some expressions we would say his face turned purple in rage. And he summoned these 3 young men and gave them a second chance. Just by chance they could reconsider their minds. And at the end of verse 15, we see Nebuchadnezzar raising the challenge to the level of the deities. He asks, then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? In other words, here was a king who was puffed up with power. He saw himself as a super god. He dared all the divinities. And he believed that everyone was at his mercy and helpless in his hands. And he thought that everyone was desperate to remain alive, and no one would dare to experience the fury of the fiery furnace. But the king did not know that there was a special breed of people with a daring conviction. A special breed of people with a daring conviction. To them, life and death was synonymous. And so being thrown into the fiery furnace was not such a big deal. And what they would not compromise was their worship, their loyalty to Yahweh. And so they dared the king. They made it known to him in no uncertain terms that they had no intention to serve his gods or worship the golden image that he had set up. This is what I call royal defiance. I would want to ask, and I would want you to help me ask the ladies in the house, if you are seated next to a lady, ask them if one of the young men was your husband, how would you have advised them? If one of these three young men was your husband and you are around there at that time and you are seeing how they are playing around with life and your children are still young and is the only breadwinner in the family, how would you advise your husband? And let them give you an honest answer. So these three young men refused to be categorized with everyone else who chose the convenient way of remaining alive by bowing down to the golden image. They decided to be the odd ones out. They stood out from the crowd. They were ready to bite the bullet. They were ready for the ridicule and the insults. It was as if the words of Jesus Christ and Paul the Apostle were ringing in their minds. Jesus said that whoever wants to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for me will find it, in Matthew 16:25. And Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live in the body, I live it by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. It's like those words were ringing in the minds of these young men as they stood before Nebuchadnezzar. We are living at a time when the rhetoric that everyone is doing it and this is Kenya is ruling our streets. Nebuchadnezzar's golden image has been erected in different times and forms, and many people are bowing down to it for convenience sake. It has been said that you cannot become rich genuinely. You must do some backstreet shortcuts. And if you occupy an influential position and you are not driving a big machine and living in a posh estate, people will say you are stupid. The golden image now manifests itself in bribes, in kickbacks, in politicians, in traditions, among other things. Sometimes we bribe our way to preaching the gospel because you don't want to waste time pleading with the police or being taken to court, and you are rushing to speak in a conference somewhere and you have committed a traffic offense. So you part with the 500 or the 1,000 so that you can arrive on time to preach the gospel. I don't know which gospel you'll be preaching. I realize that you can get your driving license without stepping into a class or attending the driving test, only if you are ready to bow to the image. I did the driving test and failed, and I had refused to give the 2,000 shillings for the bribe. And I had to redo it again, and for the second time I was given a second chance to pay the 2,000 shillings and get the license. And I refused again. At least this time the Lord came through and I passed the test and I have my driving license. Parents have normalized getting leakage for their children when they are preparing for national exams, and they call it wisdom. You can get good grades in school without having to sweat if only you are willing to bow down to the image. Many people bow to the image in order to be recruited to the police service or the defense forces or to be employed anywhere. People even sell their ancestral land. And sometimes the deal goes sour. To get some lucrative tenders, it is said that you must be willing to bow down to the image. You must scratch my back so that I scratch yours. To get your construction plans approved by the authorities, you are asked to bow down to the image first. To get that political party nomination certificate or be elected into an influential committee in parliament, you must bow to the image. You may have been threatened that by virtue of your ethnic identity, the decision on who to vote for in the upcoming elections has already been decided in advance for you. And you can't go against your community or your kingpin. But you need to let them know that you have an independent and sanctified mind which only receives commands and obeys commands which have come from the command center in heaven only. That is the only way you can be a radical radiator. That to get your cargo cleared from the port quickly, you must bow to the image. That in order to run a matatu or bus business without much trouble, you must bow to the image. And these people have taken the position, who have taken the position of Nebuchadnezzar. They think that without them you can't even breathe. They threaten you that if you don't cooperate, they can fabricate a case against you to have you fired or taken to jail or even be eliminated. They claim to have connections with the who is who in government. But you need to tell them that you have already died to Christ. And now it is Christ who is living in you. And so he is the one who makes decisions in your life. And if he says no, there is no appeal, because he is greater than even the Supreme Court of Kenya. You are always reminded that everybody is doing it. That everybody is engaging in sex before marriage. That every man is naturally and inherently polygamous. So even the men we have here in church, it is said that they have a side plan. Because men are naturally polygamous. And they can't stick to one lady. We are told that our ladies must dress scantily for them to be fashionable. But you are not everybody. You are a child of God. You are a chosen and royal priest. You are God's treasured possession. You are a citizen of heaven. That is what 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9 and Philippians 3:20 reminds us. Where are the Shadrachs, Meshachs, and Abednegos of our time? Our second point, a radical resolution. Verse 17 to 18. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O King. But even if he does not, that is our focus in this point. But even if he does not, we want you, O King, to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had an understanding of the sovereignty of God, which many of us are yet to appreciate. The fact that he is able to do all things, yet sometimes he can choose not to do something for reasons best known to himself. And they were at peace with that. They knew that God had the capacity to rescue them from the furnace and from Nebuchadnezzar's hands. But they also knew that he may choose not to. Yet that did not shake their conviction as far as bowing to the golden image was concerned. They were ready to lose their lives, but keep their loyalty to God. Unfortunately, many of us today are following Christ because of some material and other earthly benefits that we hope to get from him. One time Jesus rebuked the crowd and told them in John chapter 6, you are following me because you ate the bread and had your fill. It's not because you are interested in matters of the kingdom. This could be wealth, money, health, a spouse, a job, a business, happiness, an asset, promotion, a visa, etc. And this has provided cheap fodder for the thriving prosperity gospel enterprise. Good as they may be, they should not be the key reasons why we are following Christ. Because with such a perspective, your faith is not anchored on solid ground. When you are hit by the storms of life, your faith crumbles like ice cream when it is exposed to heat. Because you believe that a believer should not be sick. When you fall sick and the sickness persists for some time, you think that God has abandoned you and you decide to backslide. Sometimes we are kicked to give God some threats and deadlines. And we tell him, God, if you don't bless me with a job, with a spouse, with a car, God, with a promotion, with a child, with a house this year, or if you don't heal me or my loved one, I will backslide. In fact, I'll become an atheist. But who are you to threaten God with deadlines? Do you think God is so desperate to have you in his kingdom? It is us who are in desperate need for God and not the other way around. He's all sufficient, yet he's loving and caring to all his creation. I know there are important things that you are trusting God to do for you. But what if he does not? Will your convictions about God change as a result of that? That's the question we need to ask ourselves as we ponder about a radical resolution. Number 3, radiance in the furnace. Verse 19 to 25. So Nebuchadnezzar was furious with these 3 young men, and he decided to show them that he meant business. I can imagine that Nebuchadnezzar was imagining how in the next few minutes, these 3 young men would become a burnt offering in the furnace. And he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. This reminds me of volcanic eruptions, when the hot magma comes out of the peak of the mountain and starts flowing, burning. I suspect that was the kind of temperatures which were in that furnace. You land inside there, and within a few minutes you have become hot liquid. Just an evidence of that, the soldiers who threw them into the furnace, they were killed by the flames, yet they were outside. Just to show you the intensity of this heat. And so these 3 young men, firmly bound, they fell into the fiery furnace. But an unusual spectacle was spotted. 3 men had been thrown into the furnace. But within some split seconds, the king stands to his feet, springs up to his feet, bewildered and amazed. He asks his royal advisors, did we do a mistake? If my memory serves me right, we only threw 3 young men into this fire. And they were bound. So I was expecting to enjoy the spectacle of them being consumed by the flames and wriggling in pain. But look, they are walking around in the fire. And they are not 3. therefore. And the fourth one is not a Babylonian. Neither is he a Jew, but he looks like a son of the gods. He was actually the son of God himself. What a spectacle. When your enemies thought that they had dealt you a final blow, an irredeemable technical knockout. Sometimes I enjoy boxing, especially when it doesn't last for long. When somebody is given a technical knockout. I participated in informal boxing when I was in primary school. And sometimes, once in a while, I experienced the technical knockouts. But I thank God I've survived this far. When your enemies expected or they thought that they had dealt you a final blow, an irredeemable technical knockout, then they see you smiling and thriving and they wonder what happened. You may be framed with false charges and they may succeed even to have you sent to prison. But even there, God can still show up and put them to shame because God is never late. His time dynamics are the ones which are different from ours. But he shows us he shows up big time and dramatically. He never abandons his people. He says in Isaiah 43 verse 1 to 3 that fear not, I have redeemed you, I have summoned you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Because of their radical stand, they radiated God's glory in the furnace when Jesus joined them right there. We would have prayed that God prevents them from being thrown into the furnace, which was possible. But what brings him more glory? Preventing them from being thrown into the furnace or allowing them to be thrown, then neutralizing the fire. These are some of the phenomena in life which are beyond the scope of science. Science cannot explain miracles because they are not within its jurisdiction. Only faith can explain miracles. It is naturally expected that any materials that comes close to fire will be affected in one way by the heat. But for these men, none of their hair was singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Deuteronomy 4:24 describes God as a consuming fire himself. And I believe that the writer of Hebrews had this radical trio in mind when he talks about those who quenched the fury of the flames in Hebrews 11:34. These three young men caused Jesus to appear in the fire. Stephen caused Jesus to stand in heaven at the right hand of God in Acts chapter 7 verse 56 because of his radical testimony which caused him to be stoned to death. What radical thing will you be remembered for as a disciple of Jesus in this century? Number 4, royal conviction. Verse 26 to 29. For the very first time, Nebuchadnezzar recognized the trio as servants of the Most High God. He previously knew them as 3 Jewish young men. But now he recognizes them as servants of the Most High God. He recognized and appreciated the fact that these 3 had trusted in their God and defied his command and were willing to give up their lives than commit idolatry. And he also acknowledged that no other God can save in that manner. And he issued another decree that anyone who speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they would experience the experience of sukuma wiki and cabbage in the hands of Mama Mboga, and their houses would be turned into piles of rubble. Their radical, defiant stand convicted and humbled the proud, arrogant, and ruthless king. Are you serving under an impossible, arrogant, ruthless, and godless boss who is always issuing threats left, right, and center, is not giving you peace of mind? Just stand your ground as a believer and do your job well. It is just a matter of time. The conviction hour is coming. And finally, the royal promotion. Verse 30. Then the king promoted Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. God can reverse your situation from a catastrophe to a promotion. Let your testimony, your credentials, and your performance speak for you. You don't have to bow down to the golden image for a promotion. You don't need a godfather, because you already have God the Father on your side. As we bring this to a close, I want to encourage each one of us today. Don't compromise your identity. Don't sell your birthright. Keep the faith. God is faithful. He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek and serve him. And he always distinguishes his servants. And remember our 5 points for today. Royal defiance, a radical resolution, radiance in the furnace, royal conviction, and a royal promotion. Let us determine to be radical radiators of God's glory in our generation, in Jesus' name.